Take your images to the next dimension, really. In Photoshop CS4, you can create your own 3D images or take in images from other 3D sources. In this chapter, I'm going to show you how you can create a 3D image, animate it, and export it. So let's get started. In this lesson, I'm going to show you some really cool things you can do with Photoshop CS4 and 3D imagery. I'm going to start out with something really simple that all of you can do whether you have access to 3D images or not. First of all, I'm going to wrap around this particular image around a sphere. The big problem with that is that I have edges, and when these get wrapped around and then touch each other, we're going to have some really weird effects. Essentially, a border is going to be created, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to show you a little trick to avoid that. I'm first of all going to change this into a layer by holding down my Option or Alt key and double-clicking on the word background. And then I'm going to make a selection of the left side of this image. I'm pressing Command or Control J. That lifts that chunk up to a separate layer. Take my Move tool and just reposition this off to the side. Now, this is kind of what would have appeared if I did not go through the steps that I'm going to go through to blend these edges together. So I'm just going to hit the arrow key, nudge that over a little bit. It's important that as I drag this over, whether it's off down here or not, that I am holding the Shift key so it is perfectly straight and so that these clouds match up. Now I also need to come in here and I need to choose Edit, Transform, and Flip Horizontal so that this cloud will match up with the other cloud, and then also choose that I want to Image Reveal All to open this up to show the extra image area that was kind of pushed off the screen earlier. Now I select both of these layers and then I can choose Edit Auto Blend Layers. Leave it at Panorama. Click OK, and now I've got a nice blend. I love that feature. It's great. Now I can do one of two things here. I can either merge these layers together or combine them into a smart object. I really don't need to open up these layers as a separate item anymore. So I am in fact going to choose that I want to flatten these layers. So I'll just go all the way down and flatten this image and then just Option double click to turn it back into a layer. I'm going to call it Sky just so that I have an appropriate name for it, and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to call this Sphere. The reason I'm duplicating it is so that I have a background. I'm going to take this layer called Sphere and I'm going to choose 3D, New Shape from Layer, and I can choose from any of these shapes. So if I want to make a donut, soda can, sphere, I can choose them from this drop-down menu. Now, I turned it into a sphere and you'll notice that I'm going to select the 3D Rotate tool. And let me explain what I'm doing. With the 3D Rotate tool, I'm actually moving my object around. Now you see a slight seam, but nothing like what we'd have gotten if we didn't work on it. And of course, if you want to spend a little more time feathering those edges, you could even get a totally seamless look to that. Now I am moving this around, and I'm using the 3D Rotate to do this. There is also a tool that's called the 3D Orbit tool. And this essentially moves the camera view around. Now what's the difference with this? Let me slide this over. See that dark area there where there's a lack of light? If I select my 3D Rotate tool and spin this, that light source stays the same. If I select my 3D Orbit tool, that light source moves. So it's essentially changing. Think of yourself as holding a camera and maybe flying around the Earth. So you're changing the way it looks, but it's really based upon the view you have, whereas in this case, it is spinning. Now, each one of these tools have related tools at the top that both work the same way. So like for instance, if I select the Rotate tool and I want to roll my object, again, I'm rolling the object. Whereas if I choose the Orbit tool and I choose to roll this, I am really just rotating the view. Now, how can I show this to you a little better? Best way to do this is to introduce you to some lighting features and then kind of incorporate the two. So I'm going to choose Window 3D, and there is a totally separate panel for 3D objects. And in here, as a default, I have 3 infinite lights. And you may not be able to see those lights unless you turn them off or on, and you can see how they affect the image, and then you can also change them. So I'll turn this back on. In this case, my 3 lights are set at the defaults, and I'm going to go ahead and change them just a little bit. So I'm clicking on the infinite light 2 because that's the one that is kind of hitting right on, as you can see. And once I have this selected, I can choose a couple different things. I can choose to change this to a spotlight or a point light, and then I can change the options. So if I leave this at a point light, I can even make it more intense or less intense. I can check the use attenuation button to kind of fade that out a little bit. I like it a little bit stronger. And I can also come up here and turn on the lights. So once I click on drag the lights, you'll notice that I'll come down here to the bottom and I will click the toggle lights button so that I can see the actual lights. I already indicated that I want to drag the light, and now I can reposition this myself. So maybe I like this light. I want a really strong light here. Now, this will be really easy to tell the difference between these tools now. If I come back to the 3D Rotate tool and I turn this, this is the effect I want. I'm actually going to create an animation, and I want the light to stay the same. Whereas if I select the 3D Orbit tool, that light travels with it, and I don't want that effect. So let me go back to the 3D Rotate tool, and in fact, I'm going to turn off the lights. Now this is okay, but I'm creating maybe something for the environment, keep the environment clean. So I'm going to put some text on this sphere that when it spins, all of a sudden it appears. So I'm going to go over to my layers panel, and you'll see that my original layer is still here as a texture, and even a thumbnail comes up so that I can see what it looks like. I'm double clicking on this, and it opens up this separate document, a .psb. I'm taking some text, and I'm just going to type the word clean. And I'm going to select all and press Command-Shift greater than to make it a little bit larger. And maybe I'll change the font, and I'll just choose Popular Standard, make it a little bigger yet. I don't really like this color, and I am going to hold my Command key down and pull it down onto a cloud, so I probably want to choose maybe a blue color. Click OK, and maybe even take it so far as putting a drop shadow on. But you know what? I won't use that straight on drop shadow. I'll make it a little bigger so it looks a little softer. There we go. Now if I save this, Command S and then Command W, you'll see that when I take my 3D Rotate tool, that this text is actually on there. How cool is that? I need to roll this a little bit. Sometimes you need to adjust these tools. Now, something to keep in mind about these tools, there is a reason why you have separate tools for the 3D objects. You can't really go in and start scaling and transforming a 3D object with the typical tools that you would use in Photoshop. You need to take advantage of the tools that are built for 3D objects. So, for instance, if I need to scale this, make it bigger or smaller, I would choose the Scale 3D Object tool. Now remember, this is actually scaling the object because I'm in the Rotate tool. If I just want the camera to come closer or further away, I could choose the 3D Orbit tool, and then I could zoom the 3D camera in or out. And again, the difference is that the lighting will not be affected if you're using that Orbit tool and you're just changing the camera view. Now I've got this, and I'm noticing I want to tweak the word clean a little bit, so I'm going to double click on this, bring this up, maybe just make it a little bit smaller. In fact, I'll go to my Move tool and press Command T, shrink this down just a bit. There we go. Save this and close it again. And now I can see my whole word. I'm good to go.